In a hospital. He did it in a hospital. Not in that ring where violence is expected and understood and accepted as part of the professional wrestling contract between performer and audience. Not backstage in an arena corridor where tensions run high and confrontations are an occupational hazard of the business. Not at a pay-per-view event where the stakes are elevated and emotions boil over into physical confrontation. Bronson Reed, a man that Bron Breakker considered a colleague, a man who had stood in close enough proximity to Bron to understand exactly how vulnerable he was in that hospital bed, a man who had every opportunity to be better than this, walked into that medical facility, past the nurses and the monitoring equipment and every moral boundary that separates professional rivalry from something genuinely unconscionable, and unleashed a brutal, savage, completely unprovoked attack on a man who was already broken, already hurting, already fighting just to recover from the damage inflicted by the mystery attacker. Bron Breakker could not defend himself. He could not fight back. He could not do anything except absorb the violence being delivered by someone he never should have had to protect himself from in the first place. And Bronson Reed did it anyway. He did it with full knowledge of Bron's condition. He did it with full knowledge of what it meant. And based on every report coming out of that hospital in the hours since this happened, he did it with a cold, detached, almost robotic absence of remorse that is more disturbing than the attack itself. If you are not absolutely furious right now, then I do not know what else to tell you, because what happened in that hospital is the single most disgraceful act of betrayal this WWE roster has produced in recent memory, and Ring Rumble One is not going to let it pass without the full, unfiltered breakdown it deserves. Let us establish the full context of this betrayal, because without understanding where Bron Breakker was physically and emotionally at the time of this attack, you cannot fully grasp the depths of depravity that Bronson Reed sank to last night. Bron Breakker was in that hospital as a direct result of the sustained campaign of violence carried out by the mystery attacker, a campaign that had already pushed this young superstar to his absolute physical limits and left him with injuries serious enough to require professional medical attention and genuine rest and recovery time away from WWE programming. Think about what that means for someone with Bron Breakker's DNA, with his competitive fire, with his absolute refusal to acknowledge weakness or vulnerability under any circumstances. Being in that hospital bed was already costing Bron Breakker something profound in terms of pride and identity. He is not built for stillness. He is not built for patience and recovery and lying in a bed while the world of professional wrestling continues moving without him. And into that specific moment of maximum vulnerability, physical limitation combined with psychological frustration combined with the particular helplessness of being injured and hospitalized, walked Bronson Reed. Someone Bron had no reason to fear. Someone whose presence in that hospital room should have represented solidarity, perhaps even comfort, in the way that colleagues sometimes check on each other during difficult periods. Instead, it represented something that will define Bronson Reed's legacy in this company forever: the willingness to attack a man who literally could not fight back, in a place specifically designed for healing, at the moment of his absolute lowest point. That is not professional wrestling rivalry. That is not even villainous opportunism that we can process through the normal framework of sports entertainment storytelling. That is something darker and more genuinely troubling than almost anything we have seen executed in a WWE context in a very long time. Now I need to talk about the nature of the attack itself, because the details that have been emerging from witnesses inside that hospital paint a picture that is deeply disturbing on multiple levels. This was not a brief, symbolic assault designed to send a message and leave quickly. Bronson Reed did not walk into that room, deliver one decisive statement of intent, and exit before things escalated beyond a certain threshold. What witnesses describe as a prolonged, methodical, utterly merciless assault on a hospitalized man that showed absolutely no sign of stopping until external intervention finally brought it to an end. Reed used that enormous physical frame, 300+ pounds of muscle and aggression that makes him one of the most physically imposing human beings on this entire roster, against someone who was connected to medical monitoring equipment, who was in a weakened physical state, who had zero capacity to generate the kind of explosive defensive response that under normal circumstances makes Bron Breakker one of the most dangerous people on this planet. The size advantage that Bronson Reed carries into every professional wrestling confrontation was never more obscene and more morally reprehensible than it was in that hospital room last night. Because in a wrestling match, that size is a legitimate competitive tool. In a hospital room against an injured, recovering opponent who cannot defend themselves, that size becomes something entirely different. It becomes a weapon being wielded against someone with no shield. And wielding it the way Reed did last night, in that specific context, strips away every justification and every framework that might otherwise make his actions comprehensible within the world of professional wrestling. But here is the dimension of this story that I cannot stop thinking about and that I think deserves far more attention than it is currently receiving in the immediate aftermath of last night's events. The betrayal component. Because Bronson Reed attacking Bron Breakker is shocking enough on its own purely as an act of violence. But the betrayal, the specific nature of the relationship between these two men and what Reed's actions represent in the context of that relationship, adds a layer of genuine emotional devastation that transforms this from a shocking angle into something with real dramatic weight and consequence. These were not strangers. These were not distant acquaintances who occupied the same professional space without meaningful connection. Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed had built something between them, a mutual understanding, a shared respect born from proximity and parallel experience, the kind of bond that forms between physically dominant competitors who recognize something of themselves in each other. Bron had no reason to maintain his guard around Reed. He had no reason to factor Reed into his threat assessment when he was lying in that hospital bed trying to heal from injuries sustained at someone else's hands entirely. That trust, that specific, earned, carefully built trust, is what Bronson Reed weaponized last night. And that is what makes this betrayal so uniquely, specifically devastating. Reed did not just attack Bron Breakker the wrestler. He attacked Bron Breakker the person who had allowed himself to be vulnerable in Reed's presence. He took the access that trust provided and used it to deliver maximum damage at minimum risk. That is not just a heel turn. That is a fundamental character revelation that tells us exactly who Bronson Reed is underneath the carefully maintained surface presentation, and what it reveals is deeply, genuinely ugly. So what motivated this? Because the wrestling audience is always owed an answer to that question, and right now the motivations behind Reed's actions are not yet fully clear in ways that I think WWE needs to address very quickly before the narrative loses its emotional momentum. There are several theories circulating in wrestling communities right now, and I want to walk through each of them because understanding the why is just as important as processing the what when it comes to a betrayal of this magnitude. The first and most obvious theory is pure opportunism. Reed identified a moment of maximum vulnerability and calculated that attacking Bron Breakker in this condition represented his best and perhaps only realistic path to removing the most significant physical obstacle between himself and whatever championship or position he is targeting. Under this theory, Reed is simply a ruthless pragmatist who made a cold cost-benefit calculation and acted on it without the burden of emotional complication. It is the simplest explanation, and in professional wrestling the simplest explanation is sometimes the correct one. The second theory is far more interesting and far more dramatically compelling, that Reed's attack was not opportunistic at all but rather the culmination of a long simmering resentment that has been building beneath the surface of their relationship for far longer than anyone realized. That Bronson Reed has been watching Bron Breakker receive opportunities, receive pushes, receive the kind of institutional investment and promotional support that Reed believes he deserved and was denied. That every time the company chose Bron over Reed, every time the spotlight moved toward Breakker and away from someone who had been grinding in this industry for years before Bron ever stepped foot in a WWE ring, that accumulated into a grievance so profound and so personal that a hospital room assault felt not just justified but necessary. That theory transforms Bronson Reed from a simple opportunist into a genuinely complex and emotionally credible villain whose actions, while completely indefensible, emerge from wounds that are recognizably human. And that version of this story is infinitely more compelling than the alternative. The third theory, and this is the one that is keeping me up at night because of its implications for the broader WWE landscape, is that Bronson Reed did not act alone. That this hospital attack was coordinated, planned, and perhaps even commissioned by a larger power operating behind the scenes with interests that extend far beyond any individual rivalry or championship pursuit. We have seen enough evidence over recent months that there are forces at work in WWE's backstage environment that are far more organized and far more strategically sophisticated than any single superstar acting on personal motivation could account for. And if Bronson Reed is a piece on someone else's board, if that hospital attack was an assignment rather than a personal decision, then the implications for every superstar on this roster are genuinely terrifying. Bron Breakker will recover. That much is certain because the genetic material running through that young man's veins was forged in one of professional wrestling's most resilient and combative families. He will recover and he will return, and when he does, the fury that he brings back into that ring with him is going to be something that the entire WWE universe remembers for a very long time. Because Bron Breakker, angry and motivated under normal circumstances, is already one of the most frightening forces in professional wrestling. Bron Breakker returning from a hospital betrayal with the specific name and face of Bronson Reed burned into every single thought he has during every moment of his recovery process. That version of Bron Breakker is something that should make Bronson Reed genuinely, profoundly afraid. The reckoning is coming. It is only a matter of when. I need every single one of you in those comments right now with your completely unfiltered reaction to what Bronson Reed did last night. Are you furious? Are you shocked? Did you see any signs of this betrayal coming that you missed in the moment? And what do you think should happen to Bronson Reed when Bron Breakker finally gets his hands on him? Give me everything you have got, because this community deserves to process this moment together. Share this video immediately with every wrestling fan you know, because this is the most significant betrayal story WWE has told in years, and Ringrumble 1 is giving you the deepest, most honest breakdown available anywhere on the internet right now. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, turn on every single notification, because the fallout from this hospital betrayal is going to accelerate rapidly, and we are going to be covering every development in real time with the passion and the honesty that this community has always deserved. Ringrumble 1. We never look away from the truth. No matter how ugly it gets.